presenter camera and record, and then the only thing is you're going to change it to we will.
Yeah, inside that.
Ready? Okay, we're going to call the October 7th meeting to order. Just a few points of business. Bill Shalio will be doing Sky Meteors presentation. After the meeting, there is public comment, and everybody is limited to 3 minutes. It's going to be an informational to the board. We won't be doing any question answer type thing, but we will be taking notes on everybody's concerns. And with that, Mr. Shalio?
Good morning. Bill Shalio, Director of Economic Development for the Department of Infrastructure Planning and Growth. Before I begin my comments on the 2 presentations I'm going to make, I'd like to read a brief statement, please. On September 21st, I had 5 agenda items before the Board of Commissioners for their consideration. 2 of the items related to projects in the western part of the county. 1 item was for a project in the AM General area, and 1 was for a project in the Lakeville area. And the last was related to Portage Manor. At the conclusion of my presentation, several questions were asked by the commissioners about the Portage Manor proposal I was presenting. Specifically, there was a series of questions concerning discussions I might have had or that I had had with the board of directors or staff about this proposal. At the time I was answering the questions, I believe that my answers were truly and accurately reflecting events that occurred within a meeting held with Ms. Gotze, Mr. Mish, and leadership staff of Portage Manor. After a review of the commissioners' meeting video footage, which I've watched on several occasions over the last several weeks, specifically related to questions raised about my conversations with Portage Manor representatives about this project proposal, upon review, it was clear that I misstated and misrepresented facts in discussions that occurred at that meeting. There was no ill intent at the time. Again, I believe that the answers I were giving were accurate and correct. Again, upon review, they were not. And for this, I truly apologize to Ms. Gotze, Mr. Mish, and leadership staff of Portage Manor. Furthermore, due to the timeline of this project, there was ample opportunity prior to the Board of Commissioners meeting to have circled back with either the board leadership or the entire board, and also the Board of Commissioners in total, about the proposal I was presenting. I have no idea why or nor explanation why that did not occur and why that was not done, but again, I apologize to Ms. Gotze, Mr. Mish, and the entire Board of Directors. Lastly, and most importantly, the agenda item I presented has an opportunity to be part of a larger conversation about the future of the much larger Portage Manor site. What it did, however, was create a conversation about Portage Manor and its long-term viability. This was not my conversation to start, and nor was the intent of the presentation. And for that, I am apologetic to the entire Board of Directors, the staff, and the residents of Portage Manor. Portage Manor and the services it provides serve a valuable resource in our community. Through my time doing projects at and around Portage Manor, I've gained a stronger appreciation of that work that the staff and the board do to ensure that the residents of the facility get the best care and resources that are possible. This is important work, and I am apologetic if my comments have in any way hampered the mission of the facility. Thank you. The 2 items on your agenda today, 1 relates to the Magnus Capital Partners proposal that was presented on September 21st. The other relates to the DLZ work that's being done on site. Just from some basic context of the Magnus Capital Partners project, how we got from point A to point B. The city of South Bend was first contacted by Magnus Partners several months before our first conversation. I was first presented with information by the city of South Bend on April 21st, 2021. The city had a developer that was looking at sites over 3 acres for housing projects, and the city suggested that Portage Manor might be a good fit with some of the things that we were considering at that site. Over the next several months, we had several communications and shared information about the site planning work that both Bonavita and DLZ were doing on the site. We also shared information about some of the other pieces of the site and how they could all play together for a new, larger development project. Projects like the Ravine Woods Park Recreational Project, Chet Wagner Little League, the Highway Department project, and other projects. On July 8th, we had a meeting with some of the Portage Manor leadership, and we had some discussions about the project. On July 21st, we had our first in-person meeting with the Magnus Capital Partners Group and representatives from DLZ, trying to understand what information Magnus might need that DLZ has already collected and vice versa. On July 28th, the letter of intent was sent to the county for its consideration. After several discussions with Magnus and with internal staff, we made the presentation on September 21st. That presentation contained 4 items. Those are related to potential site development on the site. At this point in time, Magnus would like to take a step back, is still interested in doing development on the site, but would like the opportunity to schedule some meetings with the board of directors, with the board of commissioners, and with other parties that are interested in Portage Manor, so that they can make sure that they could move forward in a timely manner if there was a project. So at this point in time, the letter of intent, what we'll do is withdraw the item that was before the board of commissioners, and at some point in time after there's been further and additional consideration, we'll bring it back to you for your consideration.
So I think one of the main questions we have.
Can you, these microphones are great, but.
I think one of the main questions that we have is, in that letter of intent, there was an item that said, it appeared to say that Magnus has a right of first refusal to purchase or to buy Portage Manor. Is that the intent of what's going on?
So the fourth provision says, and I'll read it verbatim. I'll put these back on to read it verbatim. Consider the incorporation of the county-owned and operated asset known as Portage Manor into the project, which may take the form of either a redevelopment of Portage Manor as a component of the project or an operational integration of Portage Manor into the project. If the parties elect not to incorporate Portage Manor into the project, Magnus shall be granted a right of first refusal with respect to any future disposition, redevelopment, or change in control of Portage Manor. In the course of the conversation with DLZ, when we met with the Magnus partner groups, they had an interest in understanding more the long-term viability, how the long-term funding was going to work for Portage Manor. They spend a lot of time working on grants, federal, state grants. They thought they could be a resource to the conversation. In the event that it was determined that at some point Portage Manor, its use, not the facility itself, made sense in another location, a new structure perhaps, or some other type of use, they had an interest in having a right of first refusal on the building itself so that it could be incorporated in as part of an adaptive reuse or as some other part of the project. Again, no interest in acquiring it straight out and discontinuing the use or demolishing the building or anything like that.
Bill, I guess I also want a clarification. We met with you, myself, Mike, and Robin over 8 months ago. Not July. It was well over 8 months ago. It was a very preliminary meeting that you said, hey, City of South Bend has brought this up to me as a possibility. I asked, is it going to be a HUD or a Section 8 housing? You said no. At no time was there ever an okay to go ahead and do anything with Portage Manor. I just want that clear to this board.
Certainly, no.
And we never okayed not to, or to sell Portage Manor. We never said, don't make a presentation to the board. I think those were misleading statements that were made. And I want it for the record that that, in fact, was the one and only meeting, at least Mike and I attended, that we even discussed this affordable housing.
The meeting we had in my office was on July 8th, based on the PowerPoint presentation that I had in my files. I mean, July seems like a long time ago, so and that's why I guess we can go back through and make sure there wasn't another date that was earlier than that. But you are absolutely correct. The conversation about Portage Manor itself, the physical structure being incorporated in the project, only came at a later date after comments and conversations with DLZ and the design team.
But you were also going to get back to us
Yes.
if there were any other developments. And the next thing we knew is it's on the agenda and we're included with what looks like you're going to sell Portage Manor.
Right. And again, Yes, I made representations at that meeting that were incorrect, and I do absolutely apologize for those.
I just want my board to be reassured that there was nothing done on our part behind the scenes. Thank you.
As far as the DLZ proposal item, the second item on your agenda, we have gotten a preliminary model from DLZ as far as the demolition of the garage structure, the silo, some of the environmental issues that need to be addressed. That project proposal came in at 11:30 today, so we haven't had a chance to review it. We'll bring that before you at a future meeting. My biggest concern is when we do I've been involved in several demolition projects so close to housing and utilities that are so integral to the running of a 24/7 facility. We want to make sure that we get it properly planned so that when we bid it and put all the pieces together, that we don't have any issues with that. So I don't want to rush that. I want to bring that back to you and get full input at your next
And
meeting.
can you clarify which building to the board that you are talking about the
Yeah,
demolition?
So.
Thank you, sir.
So let me take a sidestep, if you'll allow me the opportunity. June of 2020, the Portage Manor Board and the county, or I guess actually the county was the lead applicant, received a grant from the National Trust Intervention Fund, which was part of the Kohler Intervention Fund, managed by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. That produced this Bona Vita architecture report that was really the first step in a lot of the site work that's happened on site since then. Specifically, the buildings that have concern, if you would turn 1, 2, 4, probably to the 6th through the 7th page. There's actually a series of numbers on top of the buildings. Specifically, the buildings that have impact for the work that DLZ is doing for us as far as demolition, environmental planning, are buildings 7, 10, and 6. 6 is the boiler house, 10 is the silo, and building 7 is the garage building. It's a 2-story garage, 1 story in the basement, 1 story at grade. That's the building that has all the bricks falling off of it presently. So as the work has gone on, we found that there's 3 underground storage tanks adjacent to the buildings. There's a maze of utilities that run kind of around and between buildings 7 and 10 and buildings 7 and 5. And so what we've done is we've taken extreme caution and a lot of work and planning to make sure that we only affect the buildings and the issues that need to be addressed at this point in time. So to your question, building 7 is the garage building. We don't anticipate that there'll be any demolition specific to the boiler house building, but there will be some cleanup of barrels in the basement and the coal bins that are to the east and to the north. There's structural integrity issues and concerns there. So those would be part of a demolition project, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. The one other thing I could ask about this report, so we did a grant closeout for this. It was due the 30th of September. The one thing I don't know that ever was done was that this was ever formally presented to the board or formally received by the board.
No, sir.
So at some point, we would need to formally receive this by the board so that we can file that as part of our grant closeout documents.
First time we've seen it.
Yep. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Board members?
So to clarify, before you take this to the Board of Commissioners to bid out, you're going to have DLZ, or you're going to have that presentation to the board for us to review?
That is correct. There are some items just in the initial review of the documents DLZ has sent, that there's some decisions that need to be made, whether we leave doors, whether we remove doors and fill them in, what we do with the condition of the ground. One of the other things that's been a concern, I guess kind of an ongoing concern, are the interconnected storm drains, specifically on the south interior side of the building, the southeast, I guess, side of the building. The drains drain into the basement, have an opportunity to flood the basement. We've looked at disconnection of those drains, but disconnection of drains and not having a place for the water to drain isn't a good plan. There's hard surface in that area. That hard surface, though, is tied to the loading area for materials and supplies into the building. So we can't just pull it out without regrading it and having something in a temporary place to load and unload materials. So there's work that needs to be done to make sure the demo plan meets the requirements. The other thing too is we're approaching winter, and so it may be a two-stage demolition. We may remove the garage building, come back and regrade and do paving or restoration in the spring. But those are conversations that we need to have with the board before those decisions are made or anything is brought forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board members? No. Okay, Bill, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mike, you're up.
All right, my name's Mike Mesh. I'm the vice president of the board. I actually had the opportunity to meet with a concerned citizen who has a relative at Portage Manor a week or two ago, and he implored me to give a presentation on behalf of the board of kind of what's been going on in the last couple of months, what direction the board has already discussed taking, and then potentially where is the board going next. So I thought I would oblige the citizen and give this presentation. I think he and I met for north of 2 hours. I think it was a good meeting and it was a worthwhile conversation. And so I'm going to try and boil down a 2-hour meeting to a couple of minutes here. So I'll do my best. Recently, the Board of Managers has identified issues where we have violations of Indiana code. The board has been operating sort of on an ongoing basis and without an attention to the Indiana code that governs our board, but also governs our director. And it was identified to the board several months ago that we need to make some changes and stick with our legal requirements. So the board decided that this is a necessary and it's a required thing that we have to do. And so there were certain items that I've identified here, and let me just say on behalf of the board, you know, it's something that we apologize for. It shouldn't have been happening. We weren't complying with our open door laws. We weren't complying with certain requirements that this group of 11 walk through the building and review the building for health and safety issues. But that will be happening going forward. So in any event, the issues have been identified and the board is taking steps to rectify it. And that's why this meeting has been published publicly. Now, overall, there's been some discussion of what is going on with Portage Manor. So in the media, you saw that there was about a $1.4 million budget deficit run over the last several years. The Board of Managers sat down and took a look at where have we been and where are we going, and how can we make sure that the mission of Portage Manor is continued on into the future. And so once we took a look at historic revenue, and you can see in 2019, it was about 2.4, 2020, 2.4, and the average over a 6-year period is about 2.4. So we had to take a look back at our budget that had been presented to the county council outside of the board approving it initially and rework it. And the reason for that is if we take a look at our 2022 budget and estimates of people in the beds and what the revenue is that comes in for that, we might be looking at a $2.3, $2.4 million revenue. And the budget that was presented would have cost about $3.1 million, running us at a deficit of about $826,000. So the Board of Managers sat down and said, we can't do this, this isn't sustainable. We have approximately $1.4 million in reserves, and Portage Manor won't be here in a year and a half or 2 years if we ran at the deficit that was projected. The deficit spend was a major concern of the board, and so we stepped back and said, look, we need to formulate a plan going forward, and it can't just be 1 year, it's got to be what can we do for the future. So the board formulated a 3-year plan while reworking the budget, and took the necessary steps to ensure that Portage Manor would be managed effectively and efficiently. And so here on this slide, you'll see that we're going to ensure that we hold all of our board meetings in accordance with the open door statutes. We are going to require that the full financial picture is given to the board by the administration of Portage Manor. And we're going to hold the director accountable to make sure that all the governing statutes are being followed to ensure that the appropriate management of Portage Manor occurs. So on September 9th, 2021, a presentation was given to the County Council and Commissioners in budget discussions where a budget was presented which does include some deficit spending, and a request was made that the county pick up a portion of that deficit so Portage Manor could fulfill its 3-year goal. And part of the information that I think everyone needs to know is why Portage Manor is running into a problem. So currently, Portage Manor is funded under what's called the RCAP program. The RCAP program pays approximately $54 a day per person, and I encourage you all to go look up how much the Humane Society gets per dog. It's slightly less than that. So the RCAP program is relatively terrible when it comes to funding these very necessary programs. The state has, in conversations with our prior director, indicated that the state would like to get away from the RCAP program. And the reason for that is the state would like to go towards a Medicaid program, and it's going to be a new Medicaid program we understand called R19, which should capture all of the residents of Portage Manor. But that reimbursement rate would be significantly higher on the R19 program. But the state is interested in this because the federal government would fund 2/3 of the Medicaid funding, and the state would only have to pay 1/3, where RCAP is 100% funded by the state. So based on that, our board of directors made the decision that it makes sense to look at how can we make our building Medicaid compliant. And the state has indicated that they are willing to invest in certain facilities if they can be brought up to Medicaid standards. And so, for instance, some of the standards are you can have a max of 2 people in a room. There's got to be a bathroom in every room. There's got to be 24-hour access to food. We're just not equipped like that. The majority of our rooms have 3 or 4 people in them as it is. And so that was a big driver behind our conversation. We had been working with Bonavita to take a look at our current facility to see if it is possible to upgrade the facility. And number one, just for the standard of living for the residents, but number 2, to ensure that Portage Manor would be continuing on as a going concern. And based on the projections, Bonavita gave us different presentations of anywhere from $9 to $12 million would be spent to upgrade Portage Manor. And that would result, depending on the projections you look at, of an additional $20,000 to $200,000 a year, still running Portage Manor in the red. So we decided that we're sort of at a crossroads here and we need to figure out what are we going to do. So The first thing that the board thought is we need to do a feasibility study to find out, does it make sense to build a new building so we can be Medicaid compliant, so we can provide additional services, so we can have a better standard of living. 2 people in a room with a semi-private or private bathroom is wonderful. And so that's where the board decided we really need to formulate a 3-year plan and see if we can make this happen. So we didn't want to create a crisis by deficit spending and coming to a fiscal cliff with no plan. We expect a feasibility study to take maybe a year, and based on that outcome, we are hoping we'll be in a much better position to decide what we can do with building a new facility. So what the board proposed to council was that we will deficit spend $400,000 per year. Council will pick up $317,000, so we can continue offering all the services we offer, keeping the staff that we have, and ensuring that we keep our good people around. We don't have an answer from the council yet on approval of the budget, but we're hopeful that they will approve our budget as stated. The plan moving forward, I think it's important to reiterate that I don't think there's anyone on this board who doesn't want to see the mission of Portage Manor continue. Whether that means it's in a different building or not, I think we know that we have vulnerable residents who absolutely need this service. And the board is intending to seek out alternate sources of funding. We've already talked to Mr. Eby about contacting the state to loop FSSA into the conversation. We understand that the state ran something like a $5 billion budget surplus, and they set $100 million aside for mental health, and we'd like to start that conversation quickly with them about providing funding for Portage Manor and its future. We also intend to speak to the county a little more in depth, and then the city as well, because the Portage Manor is square within the city. They provide a lot of services to the city residents, and frankly, half of the people at Portage Manor, I would guess, would be homeless without Portage Manor. So it's, you know, a fantastic facility that is doing its part right now to help with the homeless situation. So we're definitely taking a look at, you know, if we build a new facility, we don't want to have less, you know, we'll end up with less residents per room. We'll have access to better resources, hopefully a better standard of living in a brand new shiny building. And we don't want to have to retrofit Portage Manor and kick out half our people and only serve 70 when we, I think, run at an average of about 120 to 122. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's the direction the board is taking. And I invite any of the other board members to chime in.
I would just say that a lot of work with this board's due diligence has got us to this point. And we as a group want to do everything we can to keep Portage Manor up and in operation. We don't want to lose any residents. We don't want to have to close. So we are all in this together to save our residents. So please know that. Please know we wouldn't do anything against our residents. We're doing everything we can to save them. And Mike, I'd like to thank you for the presentation and spelling all of that out.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, Jeff.
Hi, Patty. As we focus on what's best for the residents, and I think that really is what we're here for, I think we can't ignore the building itself, in that it is a significant building. It adds a lot to the county, the historical inventory of buildings in the county, and there may be other appropriate uses, and they may relate to housing, just not this kind of housing, which has very specific needs. There clearly are some demands that the building has to bring it back up and to be structurally sound and to be useful. But I think that we need to maybe perhaps broaden the conversation somewhat. I know that the city now has a new housing coordinator, Ann Mannix, who may be able to work with us in terms of what the city is thinking. And this also may be another road of access to involving the city in terms of perhaps the planning as well as the use and sources of funds to kind of help do what we need to do. So I think a broader conversation, looking not only at the residents, but also looking at the physical plant that we have, it could help us, I think, kind of make the whole thing work, one way or the other.
Agreed.
Anybody else? Okay. Then the next order of business is approval of the minutes from August 2021.
I would like to actually make a motion that we table the approval of these minutes and work with the new, or the interim director to revise how minutes are done to be a little bit more clear in the sense, and since with my job here at the county, my office supports 5 boards and does minutes quite often for all of the boards. I can certainly volunteer to work with them and send him examples of how minutes should look, and then get these corrected and revisited at our next meeting.
I agree.
I'll second his motion.
I agree.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? All in favor? Next is approval of the payroll warrants for the last pay periods.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approval of invoice vouchers and claims payments.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Report a revenue statement for the time listed above and attached.
Make a motion to accept.
I have a question on that. On the revenue statement, and I know this predates your appointment as interim director, so I don't know if you inherited any notes from the previous one, but there was some discussion at our last meeting why the interest revenues were so far below projection.
I did look at that, and part
Could
of
you speak into the microphone, please?
we did look into that, and part of it is the auditor's office has simply not posted it yet.
Okay. So that you do then anticipate that our revenues will be closer to what was budgeted?
Absolutely. And
Okay,
I'll be in touch with Mr. Murphy to make sure that we stay on top of it.
thank you.
Wait, I have a question on that. So, Frank, are you referring to interest that we've received or interest that was projected?
I was wondering why, where they had projected the interest to receive when they were doing their budget for projected revenues, and why in October we've only received 11% of projected revenues in that line item. So I was asking if this was just, we hadn't gotten it posted yet, or if we just, the number was made up so far off for whatever reason. So I was just trying to get clarification on how we got to that projected revenue number, and if we were going to be anywhere close to hitting it.
I think we've received our 6-month allocation of interest. What my understanding is that the projections were based on past interest income, and interest rates have nosedived over that period of time, and that the projections were just not accurate. But you can double check on that, Mike.
Yeah, I will double check with Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, and thank you, Mike.
Any other questions? Okay, I have a motion by Tom. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? I have 11. Report of year-to-date revenue.
Make a motion to accept.
Lynn, did you say second? All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Report of financial statements for the month?
Motion to accept.
Second by somebody?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Mike, do you have an administrator report?
Yes, I do. Just a couple of things this month. First of all, and probably most pressing, COVID is back in the building. At the end of last week, we had our first positive COVID case, and this is actually our first for 2021. So we are actually doing quite well. And one thing I've said to so many people is our nursing staff, when COVID first became a thing, they took it seriously from the get-go. So during the entire pandemic, we have not lost one resident, and no one ended up seriously ill, though we did have COVID cases periodically last year. So what this means for us is that resident has been placed in isolation. We do have a COVID isolation wing, and it is fully staffed by our nursing department. This should not affect our overall budget, as we've been able to pull money out of our, let's get the proper term, isolation pay account. So there was money left in that since we hadn't had any COVID this year. And now, per state protocols, we'll have to go through 3 rounds of testing. And if all 3 rounds of testing show no positives, we will be able to open back up. So right now, our residents are not allowed to leave. We have no passes, only absolutely necessary medical appointments, and visitation has been suspended. I will say our residents are taking it quite well, but they went through a 13-month lockdown, so 2 weeks might not be that unmanageable for them. Our second point, Mr. Shalio alluded to earlier, Ray Smith, our building and grounds superintendent, and I, we did a walkthrough with DLZ last week in preparation for the proposal for demolition. So they went through the garage, the silo, and got all the information they need. So they quickly turned it around and submitted the proposals. And the last little thing to report on when it comes to finances, I've been able to close out some of the dormant accounts we haven't received payment on by ratcheting up the collection letters. So of the 4 that were outstanding, 2 have been completely closed to the tune of roughly $2,100. So we won't need to do those. We have 2 more, and these are a little more involved.
Thank
So,
you.
thank you.
And I think I can speak for everybody up here. Our nursing staff is above reproach. They have been absolutely wonderful and take wonderful care of our residents, and especially during COVID. I can't thank them enough for their hard work and dedication, and I think the board feels the same way. We are lucky to have the great staff that we do. So thank you.
Madam President, I did have a question for Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Mike, it's my understanding that approximately 90% of our residents have been vaccinated. Is that accurate?
I believe the last time I checked with nursing, I believe only 1 or 2.
Have
And
not-
there are reasons why they can't be vaccinated.
So this individual that contracted COVID was previously vaccinated?
Yes.
Okay, so are their symptoms then pretty mild?
They're very mild. It's just more of the precautionary stuff set down by the state that he has to go to isolation.
Good.
And he's really, experiencing no major effects other than boredom.
Thank you.
Mike, what is
Yes,
our
Lynn.
current census?
I did not bring that with me, but I think we are currently at 117, but I will double check and send it to you this afternoon.
Any other board members?
I don't have a question on this, but I do have a question going back to, and I don't know if it, where it necessarily would fall on the agenda, but scheduling meetings in the future with some of the outstanding consultants that have been doing work on behalf of the board that the RDC has been paying for, whether it's Bonavita or DLZ, having them come and give presentations to this board. I think it would be a good idea to get apprised of that, and I don't know if we want to wait until our next regularly scheduled meeting or try to set something up between now and the first weekend, November.
I mean, if you have contact information for DLZ and Bonavita, maybe you can invite them to our next meeting?
Next regular meeting?
Yep.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Patty, do we ever get a second bid at all?
A second bid
I mean,
on,
DLZ is the only one that's been there, right?
they're working with the county.
Yes.
Mike, can you explain that a little bit?
Again, this is something I didn't have a lot of knowledge about prior to taking over, but the county contracted with DLZ to come out. So I would say questions on the bidding process probably should go to Mr. Shalio or the engineer's office.
Madam President, I think I can speak a little bit on that. It was, DLZ was just engaged as a professional services contract to do the preliminary work to write the bid specifications so that the county could release a bid to have the buildings torn down. So that's the report that DLZ was doing. They were doing the structural engineering work on those buildings to see what would happen if one building was torn down, how it would affect the other remaining buildings. So that's the report that I believe they received at 11:30 today, so that we can get it presented. And if this board approves then that specification and taking the action to remove those buildings, the county can then put it out for bid.
Okay, thank you.
Which we would need to do at our next meeting.
If that's what the board would like, if we'd like them there.
Okay, so Mike, if you could ask, I would assume Shalio, or maybe when DLZ is coming for one, he can answer the other one or show us the proposal.
Okay.
So we can either say yes or no and get that sent to the commissioners, please.
Okay, that would be for the next meeting as well? Okay.
Anything else, guys? Okay, so we will open it up to the public. If anybody from the public speaks, please state your name and address for the record. Again, you have 3 minutes.
Roy Signs, 426 South Mead Street. First, I'd like to thank the board for coming together. This is, I think we're making some progress here and seeing some transparency in the operation of Portage Manor. I do have a few questions, though, that perhaps the board can address at some point in time. We're obviously looking at a revenue situation. So there's 2 points in the budget that I have questions regarding. One is the county allows for a mental health levy, which $4 million is currently going to, the lion's share is going to Oaklawn. Why is none of that money going to Portage Manor? All right. The second one is Mr. Kruk in the notes of last meeting's minute, or last board meeting's minutes, for Indiana Code 1237-8, which allows this board to make recommendation for a levy for the county fiscal budget, or fiscal planners to be able to allocate a levy for specifically Portage Manor. There's a second part to that which allows general funds from the county to be able to offset any deficits. Is any of that going to be addressed moving forward to address any of the revenue shortages? The feasibility study, has that been published already? Has that been requested? Has that been bid? Has that been submitted to commissioners or the proper authorities to get that approved at this point in time? DLZ appears to be doing some wonderful work out there, but it also seems like they're doing multiple projects. They're doing, out of Mr. Shalio's office, the work on Portage Manor and also the larger planning there. So I just want to understand as a citizen, Is there difference, or is it all part of the same plan, and what is that larger plan? And will Portage Manor's board have the opportunity to give input into that, those discussions? And that's all I have at this time. But thank you all for your hard work. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. The low-hanging fruit, the FFSA and the CARES Act and the ARP money. Is this board going to address or attempt to receive any of those monies to help offset our revenue deficit, especially when we have isolation beds and isolation wings where we're losing revenue because we can't fill them? And I do understand that the general census is 120 to 122 for about the last 10 to 15 years, but is there opportunity to offset any of those losses with the money that's going out in response to COVID at this time? Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Sines.
Hello, Derek Dieter, County Commissioner, District 2. I really don't know where to begin, but first of all, thank you guys for having this meeting and doing what you all need to do. New board members and everybody that's been there currently trying to do a very hard job with not a lot of help. I can just say from my first 9 months and 5-6 days as a commissioner, I'm really disheartened by the lack of information from county government itself, the lack of a redevelopment person to stand here and do a 5-minute mea culpa on stuff which is very simplistic, of not providing information to the commissioners when they attended our meeting, not providing you people, and I don't have to tell you that Portage Manor has been treated like, as they say, the dirty stepchild of not being honest. I don't know if you all are aware of the acres of roto mill that's back on your property. Yes, no? Okay.
Acres of what?
Roto mill. When streets are taken up, go walk back toward the pauper's grave, and as you go almost to the end, look to the left, you'll see 5 acres where heavy machines came in, tore down the trees, and roto mill, which was stored behind Dukem Center and the county police station on Lathrop, is now being dumped at your site. So whether it is probably capped, which I doubt, I'm sure petroleum is leaking into the soil, but that's one of the many issues that has happened at Portage Manor. And again, y'all shouldn't be the last to know. You should have been notified. It even happens to when, I don't know how many people were familiar when they ended the lease with the Lichtenbergers who were leasing the land for farms. Okay, Mr. Shalio did that, and he ended a relationship where they had been farming out there for 4 decades, and I'm gonna ask that the redevelopment reimburse Portage Manor, because you're probably at least 2 to 3, if not more years of a shovel going in there. Now you've got 6 foot of weeds and 5 acres of dirty, trashy roto mill on part of your property. So it's just that, going back to the statement that I can provide you is apparently redevelopment doesn't want to, or for whatever reason doesn't want to tell you. Original deal started with DLZ on July 17th of 2019. Subsequently, when we were out there cleaning and doing all the stuff, DLZ was out there and they had promised these buildings would be taken down August of this year. So I don't know where the disconnect is. The person who stood here for 5 minutes and misled or lied or whatever it is totally irresponsible for someone in that position to treat Portage Manor with all the work that you're all doing for the people that are there. It's just very hard for me to believe, and there's a lot of stuff I do that it takes a lot. So all of that leads to where we're trying to go forward. I told Mike I would certainly help him. Looking at other aspects, going to Fort Wayne, look what they do. And the other thing is the amount of, in the woods, if you ever want to tour that, because it still needs to be cleaned up, that which we'll probably do in the fall a little more. That property back there is awesome for just doing stuff historically, educationally, recreationally. There's a ton of great things out there that Portage Manor has been thrown under the bus, you've been run over, you've basically been lied to, not given information, which coming from a commissioner, that is really upsetting to me that you all have been put in the position you're at. So at the end of the day, what other help you need, I'm on board, I'm out there at least 3 times a week anyway, riding my bike and so on. So again, all this information, this so-called company that was gonna come in and thank for Roy for digging up on the background, I think they're gone, because we called them out on what do. You look for tax credits, you flip property, nobody knew about it, the city was involved. Mr. Shelley couldn't explain it, that was a complete cluster of a meeting to have. But again, it comes back to how they're treating Portage Manor. So again, I thank the board for doing what you're doing, and any help you all need, just let me know. I'm sorry I went over my time.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Anybody else? Okay, if not, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Madam Chairman.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is over. Anybody disagree?